Hello everybody, it is Saturday the 10th of March. I must apologise, I didn't forget to podcast last week. I couldn't podcast last weekend, and then several days during the week when it might have been possible, time just got away from me, so sorry about that. I know I've kept you hanging for 2 weeks instead of the usual one, but that will happen sometimes. It's just the way life is from time to time. I should introduce myself. I am Jared to my family, Peter to my friends and acquaintances in Oxfordshire, and Boniface to my brethren and friends in North Yorkshire and elsewhere. I am a former monk and a former bus driver. I live in Abingdon-on-Thames in Oxfordshire in the south of England with my two cats, Toby and Bunty. Toby is currently prowling around beneath me, and I'm sure will appear at some point, insistently begging for attention, as is his wont. So I would like to say welcome to my returning viewers. It's always nice that you can spend some time with me, and welcome also to any new viewers, and I hope you enjoy my little rambling conversation. And if you do, don't forget to subscribe, and you'll be notified when future videos are uploaded. And if you like the video as well, it helps people find me using the YouTube algorithms for their search engine. So, first things first, talk about Bob. I left you all hanging rather 2 weeks ago that Bob had had surgery. Well, thank you first of all for all your very kind comments and concern. I know that he and Wendy were very touched by it as much as I was as well. And the very good news is that he is feeling hugely better. He looks a lot better as well. He's obviously still tender and has to take it easy for a few weeks while the scarring settles down. But it all seems to have gone as well as you could have hoped. And yeah, he's back home. He was back home within a few days of the surgery, and everything seems to be fine. And in fact, he was round here this afternoon with Wendy. We were watching the football, Manchester United against Liverpool, which is probably the grudge match in English football. Although Liverpool has got a local opposition in Everton, and Manchester United has Manchester City in particular as its local opposition, the real opposition is between Manchester United and Liverpool. The two cities, for those of you not familiar with English geography, the two cities are probably no more than 70 miles apart from each other in the northwest. So if you know the map of Britain, and there's the kind of bottom bit that sticks out, that's Cornwall, and then you've got this lump on the side, which is Wales. Liverpool is directly on the coast above where Wales joins the main coast of England, and Manchester is about 50, 60, 70 miles inland of that. So they're very close to each other. Very similar post-industrial port cities, and post-industrial from things like car manufacturing, but also cotton, steel, mining, that kind of thing. And are the two most decorated clubs in English football. So United have won 20 Premier League titles. I think it's 20, I don't think it's 21. I think we're looking for our 21st. We won 20 Premier League titles. Liverpool have won 18. United has won 3 European Champions League, European Cup competitions. Liverpool has won 5, although United has also won the UEFA Cup and now the Europa League Cup. So there's real, and United are I think, with Arsenal, are the most successful at the FA Cup. Liverpool are the most successful at the League Cup. So there's real rivalry. And it's beyond rivalry. I was just saying to Bob and Wendy earlier that if United lose, particularly the game at Old Trafford, which is what we're playing today, it actually makes me feel physically sick. It's the only game of football where I'm so invested in the outcome that I actually, if we lose, it makes me unwell. Happy to report we won 2-1. It was an interesting game. I won't bore you with the details for many of you who are not Association rules football fans, soccer, if you prefer. It was a strong defence by United and a lot of huffing and puffing by Liverpool in the United half of the pitch, but not actually converting it into anything concrete. And the United actually scored all 3 goals, including Liverpool's goal, because it was an own goal. And in fact, Liverpool didn't, although they had the ball for 70% of the time, they didn't actually manage a single shot on target in the second half. So it was an interesting game to watch and endure to some extent. But we won, so I'm very happy. Bob's very happy. Wendy's very happy. The manager was very happy. So we're all very happy. So that's good news. Apologies if you're a Liverpool fan, but it's not my fault. Your parents brought you up badly and turned you into a Liverpool fan, is all I can say. Come over to the light and join Manchester United. You know it's worth it. Anyway, so Bob is doing a lot better, and hopefully over the next 3 or 4 weeks he will be well enough to return to work as well. So we are also, with any luck, we're going to be going away. As I've mentioned before, we plan to go to Scarborough in North Yorkshire to visit for a couple of days by the coast, but part of the reason is because there's a very good fabric shop in Scarborough, and so it was an opportunity to go up and kill 2 birds, as it were. And then I would take Bob and Wendy to Ampleforth to show them around where I used to live, because it's on the way back. But obviously that is dependent upon how Bob is feeling, and if necessary we'll just push it back a few weeks and go later on in the summer, which, you know, it's not the end of the world. So some of you who have followed me on Instagram will have known that we had some really horrendous wintry weather, not in the last 7 days, but in the week before that. So in the week following my podcast with you, there was a blast of freezing cold air that came directly to the UK across Europe from Siberia, which was given the nickname the Beast from the East. And that, as the name would suggest, came in from the east, and so the eastern coast of Britain really took the severest brunt of that weather. We didn't get much snow from that. We got a day or so of snow on the Thursday, which led to some localised problems where we have steep hills on a couple of our bus routes. But generally speaking, we weren't adversely affected by the actual snow, but it was perishingly, bitterly cold. The thermometer temperature was about -4 degrees Celsius, but in the wind, and there was a stiff easterly wind blowing the whole week, it was more akin to -12, -13 Celsius, and that is perishingly cold. The positive side of all that is that I got to wear my lovely Tin Can Knits pullover, which was a very nice opportunity, and boy did I need it. Even with that on, it was still so cold. But anyway, on the Thursday afternoon and into Friday and Saturday, the Beast from the East was also being formed by a secondary weather front from the south, which had been named by the Portuguese meteorological officers Storm Emma. I think it was Emma. Pretty sure it was Emma. Yes, it was Emma. So the south coast of England, particularly the southwest and Wales, was really, I mean, it was, because of the strong winds, there was a lot of drifting. They had, some places had more than 3 feet of snow in the drifts. Fortunately, where we are in the middle of England, we were just a little bit too far west for the Beast from the East, and just a little bit too far east for Storm Emma. So we really dodged a bullet here in Oxfordshire, but I know that other parts of the country really, really struggled. And in the last couple of days, the east coast, the northeast coast, has again been suffering snowfalls, quite significant snowfalls. And I watch a lot of shows on YouTube, podcasts from other people, but also news programs from overseas, because I like to, you have the opportunity to learn so much about the rest of the world. It's a wonderful things. So I tend to listen to a lot of these, and there seems to be a lot of surprise in other countries at how much Britain grinds to a halt when we have these severe snow days. And I suppose it does seem odd to somewhere like Canada, for example, which, you know, if they ground to a halt every time there was a snow on this scale, then nothing would happen for several months of the year. But I think the point is that in Britain, the last time we had snow of this magnitude was 1965, before I was born. So it's something that happens. We get maybe a week of snow every year or so. And then we get these occasional really bad storms every 20 or 30 years. And in fact, this one was 50 years in the making. And it came on the Monday on the east coast of Britain and had gone from the west coast of Britain by Sunday the following week. So we're only, although it seems a huge amount, it's only 7 days. And local authorities and even central government who have the responsibility for maintaining the highways and so on and the essential services and so on, it would not be a sensible use of public money to have the best equipment to clear snow on it. I mean, as a contrast to this, I guess, if you watch Arnie and Carlos, they have to clear a path along their drive every day, and it just snows, and then they clear it, and then it snows, and they clear it. And they have snow tires and they have chains and all the rest of it, but it just isn't worth the investment in the UK. Although the estimate is that the snow days cost £1 billion a day to the British economy in terms of lost productivity in particular, but also in terms of the paying for the extra services to be carried out. Even then, £4 or £5 billion is still considerably less than the necessary annual investment across the whole of the UK for weather conditions that don't normally arrive and aren't normally that bad. And I think while I'm talking about this weather, it is such an unusual occurrence. I was reading a couple of climatologists online, and from what I can tell, at this time of year, so between September and March in the Northern Hemisphere, the weather is particularly cold because we're in our winter period. And the way that the air currents in the Northern Hemisphere are supposed to work is that the winds, the trade winds, if you like, that blow around the upper atmosphere of the globe, create a kind of vortex effect over the North Pole. And this normally traps in all the bitterly cold air. But every so often there's a kind of, one of the air systems isn't as strong as it could be, or it's slightly off course from where it normally is. And that can be caused by human effect in terms of climate change that's to do with carbon dioxide and methane and other such greenhouse gases, but it can also just be caused by natural events. Earthquakes and volcanoes can disturb the air patterns as well. So it's not, although there is some evidence that they will increase in frequency due to man-made global warming, it's not, you can't simply put it down to man-made global warming. It is that plus other things. And what happens is a kind of bulge comes out of the polar vortex, and that brings this bitterly cold weather, which is what normally happens. Now, I know from Cozy Up with the Stitching Sisters and the Grocery Girls, who are both in Alberta, Canada, that they've also had these sudden freak, really cold snaps with lots of snow. And what seems to have happened this year is that rather than just a bulge sending out a lot of cold air in one direction, it appears that the polar vortex this year is actually split in two. And so one lot of it has poured down over the North American continent, and the other one has poured across Eurasia into Britain and Spain and Portugal, who would not normally have such cold weather, because the week before the beast from the east, our temperatures were around 10 or 11 degrees Celsius. I had my windows open today, so within a week of the beast from the eastern storm Emma passing through, it's returned to 12, 13 degrees Celsius down here, and spring is very much back on the agenda, and everything is kind of brightening up quite considerably. So it's just an interesting meteorological phenomenon. It may increase depending upon our actions in terms of greenhouse gases, and also, as I say, other natural phenomena over which we have very little control. But it's just, I just wanted to put some kind of context, because it can seem like, oh no, there's a flake of snow, quick Britain, everybody stay in bed. And it kind of felt a bit like that. Some people were making more of it than they needed to, particularly in these areas like Oxford, where we really were spared the worst. There were, as I say, there were a couple of housing estates that are built on the sides of hills, which were simply impassable for a day or so, until the snow had actually cleared. And, you know, that's just because you don't clear side roads as much as you clear the main roads, because there's less traffic and so on. Anyway, so all of that is bringing you up to date with where we are on the weather front. So this is supposed to be a podcast about the fibre arts. One of the things I will say is that the really cold weather did give me an excuse to stay in and do some crafting, so that's a nice thing. And in fact, having blankets or jumpers or whatever on my lap while I was working in that cold was really quite a welcome distraction. So I think, you know, every cloud has a silver lining, and for us crafters, bad weather equals crafting time. Yay! So, without any further ado, I don't have any finished objects. Number of reasons for that, and none of them bad. I have been working fairly religiously on one object over the last week. Well, until about Wednesday. The tail end of this week I was very busy with school. I had 2 committee meetings on Thursday, which ran from 5 till 7 and then 7 till 9. So in fact, I mean, I popped in to see Bob and Wendy for about an hour on my way home from work. I came home, then had to go to the supermarket to buy some cat food because I'd run out of cat food and I'd meant to buy some. So by the time I got back home from buying the cat food, I then immediately went out to these meetings. So I'd basically not been home since 5:30 that morning. So I was Thursday, and because I run one of the committees, Wednesday and most of Wednesday I was studying I sit on I'm the chair of the premises, the Finance, Premises and Personnel Committee. Get it right, it's the FPP. So I don't want to go into any personal details, but this term and until this week, in fact, and all of last term, our business manager at the school was unwell, and so wasn't at school. So we really struggled to get the proper financial figures. Although, in fact, once she'd produced the proper financial figures for us, it turns out that her staff, who had been trying to cover for her in her absence, had actually produced fairly good, accurate reports for us. But the problem was we and they had no confidence as to how accurate those reports were until we got, as I say, the business manager's report, and we could actually see that the figures were broadly all in agreement. So the good news is that the school is in good financial condition. We have a few significant investments that we need to make, and we look as though we've got the finances to be able to do that. So that's a positive thing. In terms of the premises, that means upgrading some of the facilities. And indeed, today I was supposed to be helping to dismantle some old school playground equipment, which was beyond its usefulness. And everything was ready to go, and then the skip company let us down, so we're going to have to reschedule that, which was quite nice because it meant I could see Bob and Wendy and watch the football with them. So, you know, every cloud, as I say, always has a silver lining. And in terms of the personnel, we have a very stable workforce. It's clearly a school that works for the staff and the pupils, that there is a real contentment with what's happening, and it's not a contentment that's born out of complacency. There is still the drive to improve constantly, but it's a contentment knowing that everybody is pulling together and that everybody's input is valued, and that the school is going places and producing the goods for the students in the school. That it's actually, we in some ways we've become slightly victims of our own success. We have seen a significant uptake this year amongst pupils who have either special educational needs or particular family circumstances that require a lot of support. And that's because we have had such success in former years with children who either have special educational needs or whose family lives are maybe less stable than is good for children, and is good for the family as a whole, in fact. So in some ways, we're making a rod for our own backs, that by being good at doing this, we become a school that the local authority directs parents towards, which is fine, because it's better that they go to a school where they're going to get that kind of support and that their children are going to thrive, and they do. All of the evidence suggests that they very quickly settle in, and within the limits that apply to the particular needs of the children, they really do thrive. And we stretch those limits. We're not bound by them. But there are expectations that are realistic, but still stretch the child, which is what most parents want for their children, is the sense that, you know, they are being the best version of themselves that they can be. So with that, the rest of this week really has been, the second half of the week has been a little bit slow. So I haven't actually finished anything. So I will move straight into works in progress. I'll start with the one that sounds counterintuitive. You'll be aware, many of you, and Wendy has been badgering me for most of the last 6 months, you'll be aware that I have been making a pirate blanket, a Jolly Roger style blanket for a colleague's son. And I've been working on it, and something wasn't right. I couldn't quite, it wasn't working. Somehow it just wasn't coming out the way I'd hoped it would. So I have made the decision and ripped it out. I've not ripped it all out yet, but I've started again, and I will be ripping it out and using the offcuts, the longer offcuts in the new one. So I have started again, and I'm very pleased with the pattern that I've got. This was a free pattern, in fact, and the black and white markings on the Jolly Roger are mine for counting the squares, because I always convert these charts into one of these schematic diagrams, which allow me, I think you can see that, say on, well, if I put my glasses on I can see then. I know, Bob, I know, I'm sorry. There we go. I'm going to be reading backwards, so bear with me. So for example, if I go to line 25, I know I'm going from top right to bottom left because it's going down, that there are 25 blocks to be made, and I don't think, there we are. Is that in focus? It might not be. I think it's trying to focus on my face. If I move it there, it might come into focus. But you can see that there are 6 in colour A, and then I think, is that 8 in colour B? It's difficult for me to see because I'm reading backwards, but however many it is, basically I convert this diagram. So line 23, as you can see, is listed here and goes diagonally downwards in that direction. So it comes down here, and as you can see, where it's got It must be 3. Anyway, whatever it is. I find trying to work from the diagrams and having to count all the time where things are, I just get lost and confused, whereas this schematic I find much more helpful, and then I just tick off each row as I've done them. So I'm a quarter of a way through this, having restarted it, and I'm much more enthused about it. It just seems to be going better, and I'm enjoying it more, and it's looking better. So there's not a lot to see at the moment, but that basically is it, and that you can see is the bottom of the crossbone, and that, I guess, is, given where it is, that will be the bottom of the top crossbone, I would imagine, because that will come down here like that, and that goes up like that. So it's coming on, and I am hoping I'm going to be not completely monogamous, because I could never be completely monogamous, in all honesty. I know your limits, know who you are. I will be doing that as my main work at home and get that finished, because it just seems, I don't know what it is. Maybe it's because I really don't know what was wrong with the other one. It just didn't feel right. I wasn't feeling it at all. Whereas this one just seems to be clicking along quite nicely, and it's a very odd difference in the whole process. So I'm enjoying it. It's coming along, and I will keep you informed as to where we get with that. But lines 25 to 75 are the biggest chunk. So maybe I'm not quite a quarter of the way through it, because the lines are going to get bigger before they start getting smaller again. But it's 100 lines of it's a 50 by 50 square, basically, so it's 100 lines of graph ganning, and I'm on line 25, so that's about a quarter. Anyway, so there we are. So that's one work in progress. A second work in progress actually arises from an acquisition. It's a regular acquisition. It's my Knitting and Crochet magazine. Would you look at that bunny rabbit? I'll try and get there we are. That bunny rabbit. Isn't she adorable? I'll just find the pattern inside. I just seem to be on a bunny rabbit kick at the moment. I'm not sure why. The sewing that I want to be doing is a bunny rabbit too. I'm sorry, I'm just finding the page because there are better photos inside. In fact, it's a very spring-oriented edition, this, and the colours are very spring-like, which is nice. Here we go. Here we are. Come along. I know you're in here. I know you're in here because I've been working on you. There we go. So this is basically the picture from the cover, but without the high gloss. Oh no, it's still got the high gloss reflections, but there we are. So that's the picture from the cover. And without her dress on, she looks like this, which is very nice. So multicoloured. So this is a work in progress because I only started it yesterday. I've done her head and her body and her 2 ears, and I think these are her 2 arms. Yes, they are. So I've done 2 arms. I've got to do 2 legs, which are basically 2 more of these, but with the peach body colour on top. So they're longer than the arms. And then they get stuffed and sewn together. That's why they've got long tails. And then at the very end, I make the dress using this rather nice fluffy yarn. It feels a little bit like toweling. Sorry, I'm looking at the camera here and it's over here. I keep doing that. I want to look to my right. And I think what I'm going to have to do is paint a little dot on the left-hand side so that I know to look at the dots rather than look at... Because all of the... Sorry, I'll come back to the yarn in a minute. All of the buttons to press are on the right-hand side. So it just draws your attention to the right-hand side. And then I end up looking over there and you're thinking, why is he looking over there when I'm sitting over here, kind of thing. So apologies for that. Anyway, back to the wool. This is a bit like terry toweling. it's got the same kind of feel to it as the James Seabrett Flutterby that I've been using. It's very soft. It really is very soft. And that the yellow, it's a little bit blown out. Possibly, I don't know, maybe, it's a much deeper yellow than you're getting there. It's got that same kind of brightness, but it's a deeper colour at the same time. So it seems to have lost all its saturation over there. I can't get it to appear as it is. But there we are. So I'm enjoying doing that. It's quite nice to do little amigurumi. I don't get to do them very often. Well, I mean, I could do them as often as I want, I guess. But because I'm always making other things, I don't do them as often as perhaps I have done in the past. And I really enjoy doing those little projects. And they are little projects, but they still take a lot of time. Jodie on the Grocery Girls makes this point, that working with small amounts of, you know, when you're making something like that for the ear, and you've only got, I think, let me put my glasses back on and I'll be able to tell you then. I think it's actually only something like 12 stitches around. If that, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 stitches around. So and you're using a small hook, it really does make it quite a time-consuming job. It's fiddly. I don't mind it being fiddly, but it does, although you're not making something huge, and therefore you'd think it would be done a lot quicker, it does seem to take just a little bit of time. Whereas when I'm crocheting larger things like blankets, although of course a blanket takes a lot longer to complete, you're making long rows. It's just a different feel to the process. Anyway, I don't think it's a shattering revelation of any kind. So that's another whip that I've. Oh, sorry. Now, you will remember, I'm sure, the Malabrigo that I was kindly given as a Christmas and birthday present at the beginning of the year. It is their baby silk packer, which is... Okay, I'm sorry, Bob. I know I keep putting them down because I can't see. I've been aware when I've been watching videos back that I tend to do this quite a lot with my glasses. And right next to the microphone. So I really, really am very sorry to those of you who have been annoyed by this constant clicking sound. Or even, I'll just do that, and just that little click. So that's why I've been putting them down religiously, but I should keep hold of them a little while. I tend to fidget. You may have noticed I tend to hands everywhere and all kinds of things. So it's 70% baby alpaca and 30% silk. And this is the baby silk packer lace. So it's 420 yards of 385 meters. Although, interestingly, although it's a lace weight yarn, then suggested needle size is US 3s to 8s or 3.25 to 5 millimeters. I mean, it certainly would make it a very drapey fabric, but I just can't help but think that a 5 millimeter needle with that weight of yarn would really be more whole than yarn, almost. Anyway, it is what it is. So I thought I was going to make the fox paws wrap in this, but then I decided that I'd probably use the gems for that, the Wensleydale gems, because that's a very nice wool. And I think... Oh, sorry, that was just Toby being silly. Strange noises off, as they say. But there we go. So I just felt that the lace weight would be too fine and wouldn't give enough definition for the quite complicated stacked stitches that are a part of the fox paws wrap. So I thought that the heavier DK weight Wensleydale gems would work better for that. And because they're 100% wool, they would be better in that kind of wrap than, say, socks. Whereas I suppose there would be no problem with the 30% silk providing quite a lot of strength in there. Although the alpaca wouldn't be particularly strong, you could really make garments out of the Malabrigo, but which I am doing, but not that kind of garment. So I decided to buy Stephen West's Salmon, and I've cast it on. Stephen West is, of course, as well as famous for huge shawls, he's also famous for marled shawls. So this is what I've cast on so far. I know it doesn't look like much, and it isn't. I really just cast this on so that it's cast on, because it's going to be one of those projects that I just work on a little bit at a time as the mood takes me. It's quite a lacy fabric in that once it's blocked, you'll see that there is a yarn over next to, so between the two stitch markers is the central stitch of the going down the spine of the shawl, and on either side there is actually they're not yarn overs there, they are make one left or right, so the hole isn't as defined there as it is, for example, along the edge, where after the first three stitches of the garter stitch there is a yarn over, so there is quite a substantial hole that will block out quite nicely once the shawl is finished, and will produce quite a lacy effect. I mean, the make one does produce a hole, but not nearly as significant as the ones on the left and right. So I've started it. I'm currently using these two colours together, which is what's producing this rather pretty, almost purplish. I mean, it is interesting that this, although it is purple, it looks more magenta in reality, until it's mixed with the grey, in which obviously the grey tones it down or changes the way the eye is viewing it, and has more blue in it, I guess. So it makes it much more a kind of purple colour than the magenta alone. So anyway, and you may well remember, and if you don't, I'll just show them to you because I have them all here. These are the 5 colours of the shawl. So it'll be very exciting to see them together. Rather than in single blocks of colour, they're going to be marled. So the most interesting one to see how it works will be those two together, which are the two darker colours. I think that is going to look spectacular. I think that is going to look spectacular. And this is going to be breathtakingly beautiful, icily cold almost, because again, the blue in here accentuates the blue in here, and I think will really make that quite a cool looking combination. Anyway, we shall see as and when. I wanted to get the first part done so that it's one of those projects that I can pick up and do a little bit of work on and then put aside as the mood takes me. I have to say, I'm glad I'm doing it marled, because 2 strands together, and these are 3.75mm needles. 2 strands together is actually the perfect. I struggle with very small needles and very small thin yarns. Excuse me. So this is really, really suiting. This is hitting all the buttons, and this, it's so beautiful to use. It's just, I was going to say it's like silk. It is silk, and the alpaca, baby alpaca, is just so soft as well. It's a real delight to do this. So I'm hoping over the next month or so, I guess, to have rather more of this to show you. So there we are. That's a new work in progress. I will stick with this now. No, I won't. I'll come back to it in a moment. I have been working on my socks. I've got one more. So, sorry, I shall show you the socks. I'll just pull this needle back on so that it's not going to fall off while I'm not knitting. I really love these stripy socks. And I've just got to finish this colour repeat. So when it starts changing to grey, that's the point at which I'll start introducing the wraps and turns for the short row heel. And then it will be onto the home straight, then straight up the leg. So whereas the thing to note, I suppose, about this is I've been doing them two at a time. And as you can see, they are separate. That strand is not connecting them. They are two separate socks at this stage, both identical socks, except that I didn't quite get the colour repeat right. It's one section out. If I'd started that on the grey, because this started on the grey, they'd be absolutely perfectly matching. But actually, I don't really like matching socks. So I'm really quite happy with this. I don't think anybody is going to notice unless they really get up close to my legs, to my lower legs, in which case I would think I would have rather more important and urgent questions as to what the heck do you think you're doing, rather than worrying about whether or not I've got two identical socks. Anyway, so at the moment I knit along this edge with this yarn, drop it, pick up this yarn, knit that edge, turn them around, readjust them, and then knit along that edge and knit along that edge. So dropping the yarn at that point, and that's so you go all the way around. When I get to the short rows, what I will have to do is, because of the way this works, I'll have to knit across and then back across and complete the heel on sock A, if you like, and then do the same thing, complete the heel on socks B, and only then go round and round and round as I have been doing. And as I say, we're back on the home straights, and that's just the mechanics, because with the short I won't be knitting all the way round. When I'm doing the heel, I'm knitting a flap here, which means I go across, turn it round and come back, and then turn it round and come back, and turn it round and come back, and so on and so forth. So I just have to remember that and not be dismayed. It will end up exactly the same because there are the same number of stitches on there, and you have to do the wraps and turns until there are 8 stitches remaining, so that's 7 on each side, and there are 22 stitches on both insoles and both feet, both soles as it were, so it will they'll end up being identical, even though they'll be done separately rather than all at the same time as the rest of the socks have. So I'm just getting to the end of that final repeat. I've got about half of each ball left, which is about right, so the sock length will be a little shorter than this, but that's about the length I like my socks, so that will be fine. And I've got that in my Mrs. Brown's bag, which I absolutely love. So, acquisitions. I've mentioned Mrs. Brown's bag. I think I should mention the elephant in the room. Those of you who follow me on Instagram have already seen this bag. This is a bag by Rectory Crafts on Etsy, and I just think I saw it and I thought I had to have that. I was really pleased with the size of it. It's very, very well constructed. It's got very good interfacing, so it's quite a stiff bag and will stand up under its own volition. The pops of colour from the fox and the red squirrel really work. I even saw eventually that there was an owl in the tree just there. And it's the same, and lovely partridges, given that the colourway of the socks is partridge, which is that's a West Yorkshire Spinners. And what is it? It is 100% blue-faced Leicester. That's right. And that's their partridge colourway. So in here, and the inside is this calico. And there's a lovely pocket as well there, but I've got my spinning in there, so I'm really hoping this week I will be doing some spinning. I've decided I've got the Craftsy class, I just need to sit down and take some time for me and do my spinning. So that's what I'll be doing this week. So I should have some spinning, I hope, for you next week. But I can thoroughly recommend these bags. This is as I say, Rectory Crafts on Etsy. She is based in, well, near Stansted Airport. So Stansted is one of the London airports to the northeast of London towards Cambridge. So going up the M11, going up towards Peterborough and so on. and she lives in a village just outside the airport. How close, I don't know precisely, but she doesn't live in the airport itself, obviously. And I just love this. And I was actually thinking when I bought this that I love watching nature documentaries on the television, particularly the wild variety of animals and birds and plants that exist on this wonderful planet of ours. But it's when you see something like this, you actually realise that these are all indigenous. Well, actually, they're not indigenous. The rabbits are not indigenous to the United Kingdom, but all of the other animals on here are. The rabbits were introduced by the Crusaders when they returned from the Holy Land in the 10th, 11th and 12th centuries. Well, the 11th and 12th centuries mostly. And for a long time was the meat of kings only. Hares are are indigenous to the UK, but not rabbits. Rabbits are so that I think is a hare, whereas this is a rabbit. They're very similar types of creatures, but anyway, there is a difference. And it got me thinking, actually, that I remember one occasion that leatherback turtles, which are one of the oldest air-breathing amphibians on the planet, and they lay their eggs in the Caribbean every year. And so, because they come from the Caribbean, there is a tendency to think of them as exotic creatures from warmer climes, for those of us who live in the northern bits of the northern hemisphere. But in fact, although leatherback turtles, their juvenile life is based around the Caribbean in the warm waters, as adults they spend almost all of their life in the cold. They particularly are based off the coasts of Britain and Ireland. So they are, in one sense, more indigenous to the United Kingdom than they are, in fact, to the Caribbean. And I suppose the point of that little musing is that we should always question our assumptions. Things are not always as plain or as simple as we might think they are. That there's always another story underpinning things, and it's just to have that open and inquiring mind, which I like to think I do have. If you'll excuse me a minute, I had some wine with Wendy earlier, and this is just it's a peas porter. It's very nice, very soft. The only problem with white wine, and Wendy has the same problem, is that red wine, no problem, beer, cider, no problem. White wine in the afternoon just makes me want to go to sleep. Anyway, so cheers and excuse me. That's very nice. Right. My second acquisition, well, my third acquisition, I suppose, because the magazine is technically an acquisition, although it's a subscription. So I didn't actually buy it this time. It's already been paid for, but you know, it is what it is. I've showed you the Malabrigo, the Stephen West shawl that I have cast on, and that I'm currently enjoying making. Oh, one other thing about this, I'm not giving a huge amount away because it's just saying how it started. I had to cast on 3 stitches and then knit 7 rows of garter stitch of those 3 stitches. So basically knit 21 stitches, but in 7 rows. And then after completing the 7th row, you don't turn the work, you pick up 3 stitches along, so you turn the work sideways and pick up 3 stitches along the edge, and then turn it sideways again and pick up 3 stitches along the cast on edge, and then you've got the 9 stitches from which you grow the rest of the shawl, which actually means that the edge of the shawl is not, so I think you can see the cast on tail is actually not at the edge of the shawl. I thought that was a very clever construction. I mean, I don't think that's a trade secret. I hope I'm not telling anything remarkable. I was a little bit bemused when I first read the instruction. I thought, really? You want me to do that? And so I did it, and actually, it now makes perfect sense because it provides a seamless edge to the because this is actually the other side of the knit, which is what this is. So that there is actually no jog where you've cast on. There's no slip knot there. There's no sense that it's different there. It's quite a clever idea. Anyway, going back to the needles. These needles are part of a new acquisition. They look very familiar. They should look very familiar. They're identical to the ones that are in my purple pack of Chinese. But this is actually a small green pack. And this just has the circular needles in it, and they go from a size 16, which are very small, I'm guessing 1.5mm or something like that, all the way up to the size 6, which I would imagine is something like a 5mm. I'm using a size 9, which is 3.75mm. And I just wanted to mention these because I've mentioned in the past how much I enjoyed them. And this was actually a question I was asked on Facebook. And it made me go and have a look. This set costs less than £10 on Amazon. So I will put a link in for you down below. I find that they're not interchangeables, they are fixed. But I do find that this cable is very flexible. It's a steel kind of I can't think of what the word is. Oh, it's twists, plied, that's the word. It's a plied cable of that goes around and is coated in a kind of plastic. And this connection there is no snagging whatsoever, even with something like this Malabriga, which is a lace weight alpaca and silk blend, and it just slips off and on, and there's not the slightest problem with it at all. So I can thoroughly recommend these. They have them in 3 different sizes. I think I got the 40-inch ones, which is the distance from one tip to the other tip. I find these are sturdy and very easy to use. Particularly for those of us who might be on a budget, I can thoroughly recommend these. They really are very, very good, particularly at the price point. So it's just something to share with you. I have one final acquisition, which isn't really an acquisition. You may remember, I should have brought it in. I'm sorry I didn't. I bought a lovely hand-turned spindle, if you like, for putting a skein of yarn on, so that you could actually use the outside of the wool rather than having to find the inside, because it's not always easy to find the inside end. And by putting the wool on the spindle, it then just revolves around and around, and the yarn comes off, and you've not got it rolling all around the floor, or cats playing with it, or any other such nonsense. Well, I was doing some work at work, and one of the legal requirements with CCTV for use by the police or in civil courts is that it must be uncompressed data. So file formats such as the one that's this YouTube video, which is MP4, is compressed using a particular algorithm to speed up the transmission of the data, but leave you with... So there's blending of the images goes on between what is actually initially recorded, or what is viewed by the camera, if you like, and what is actually output onto YouTube. So when I put it up onto YouTube, it gets converted by the YouTube processors and produces the video that your machine can read. And that's quite normal. Most people will have come across MPEGs and MP4s as well as JPEGs, which are form a compressed picture. But clearly, in the compression process, it would be possible from time to time for a piece of data to be compressed in such a way that it might make something appear to be there that wasn't, or it might eliminate something that was there but was insignificant to the algorithm but might be quite pertinent to the case or the defense. So the courts are happy to accept recorded CCTV, but it must be uncompressed. And so I make a download from the drive in the bus onto the computer, and from there copy that as an uncompressed file onto a CD-ROM or DVD-ROM, depending upon the size of the file. Which is quite an antiquated technology in many respects, but it's the only way of ensuring that the data is uncompressed, because the moment you start converting to MP4, then you're compressing data, and that's just not acceptable to the courts, and for all very good reasons, as I'm sure you understand. But it does mean that we get through an awful lot of CDs and DVDs, and we buy them in the big tower packs that you've possibly seen or remember from the dim and distant past. And when you've used them all, what you're left with is this lovely spindle. And there's also this extra disc of plastic which is always placed at the bottom. And so it's possible to stick a skein of wool onto the spindle, there it is, coming out the end, and use the end, and lo and behold, I have a spindle. So I have given one to Wendy. I've got this one. I use a pack of CDs maybe once every 6 weeks. So this will be quite a nice little. I like it on a human level because it is about making do with what you have. I like it on the fact that this is plastic, and if this was thrown away, all that would happen is it would go to landfill or be burnt. Neither of which are particularly good for the environment, whereas it will sit quite happily. I mean, this plastic will outlast me, same as my wooden spindle as well. So so if any of you have access to the old CD towers, there would be a plastic cover over this, if you recall. I'll see if I can find a picture on the internet. There must be some picture of a CD tower of discs, and I'll pop it on for you just so that you can see what it's like. But I just thought I'd share that with you. So that it's not an acquisition that I bought, but it's certainly a good idea that I'm quite happy to share with you, and just in case any of you do have access to these plastic spindles, because that's a nice idea. Oh, and my final acquisition, I had to buy some more organza bags for my lavender buds to go in, because I've used all of my others. Lots of lovely different colours of bag in here, as you can see, and fill those up with lavender, and it really does smell lovely. Oh, now, bear with me, bear with. I am just going to go and get something which I meant to bring, so I'll just take this off. Let me pour. Hello, sorry about that. So, I talked last time about my friend Rachel, who used to work with us and now works for Mercedes. And she was really excited about being mentioned. So here you are, Rachel, I'm mentioning you again. But don't worry, you're worth it. Rachel is one of the nicest, kindest people it's possible to meet. And she's one of those people that when you're in the same room with her, you just feel happy. She has a happy demeanour about herself, and that kind of attitude to life is contagious. And I always enjoy having a natter with her and finding out what's going on in her life. Well, she gave me, if you recall, this cap, and I said it was from Nico Rosberg because it says Nico here, and here's his signature, I thought. And he's written to Pete there. Well, it turns out that, in fact, this is Nico Rosberg's signature. This is Lewis Hamilton's. That, in fact, this has been signed by both Nico Rosberg and Lewis Hamilton. So this is a cap signed by 5 World Championship winners, and 2 of them for Mercedes. So I'm even more happy with this because actually I'm a Lewis Hamilton fan first and foremost, as Rachel knows. So the fact that this has been signed by both of the Mercedes World Champions is just even better. I couldn't believe it, but there we are. So I've mentioned it, Rachel, and I thank you once again for this wonderful gift, and I treasure it, and I keep it in its plastic bag so that it's kept safe, particularly from pussycats. I was going to talk about some other things today, but I noticed we're coming up to the hour, so I think the only thing that I will talk about is my 3 facts about myself. I've read the comments that people have made and the messages I've had, and I had a chat with other people about this, and I am amused, though perhaps not surprised, that absolutely nobody got it right. So the 3 facts were that at the age of 13 in 1982, Pope St. John Paul II celebrated Mass. Sorry, he wasn't 13, I was 13 in 1982. I served the papal Mass of Pope St. John Paul II at Heaton Park in Manchester when he ordained 12 men to the priesthood. The second fact was that I once had a portrait painted of my legs, and the third was... I can't remember. What was the third? Oh, heavens. Oh, that I've had a #1 selling album. That's right. Well, in fact, it was #1 that was wrong. I didn't serve the papal Mass. I was 13 in 1982, and I did attend the papal Mass at Heaton Park in Manchester when 12 men were ordained to the priesthood. But in fact, I was one of the 4,000 people in the choir for that occasion. So it was a bit of a trick question in that sense, because it was believable that I would have been an altar server for that Mass. But in fact, I was in the choir with my family. And indeed, I was singing treble then. I was 13 and a half when the Pope came, well, nearly 13 and 3/4 when the Pope came. My voice broke not long after the papal Mass. And the very last thing that we sang, so the very last thing that I ever sang as a treble, was the Hallelujah Chorus, which, frankly, if you're going to go out on a high note, literally. The only problem with that is that I've never sung the Hallelujah Chorus except as a treble. So when I hear it now and sing along, because who doesn't sing along when you know a piece of music, I'm always singing the treble part, though obviously in a much lower range, a register now. But anyway, so that was the untrue statement. So I'm sure you're all agog now as to why on earth I would have had, sorry, I'll put the glasses down, why on earth I would have had a portrait painted of my legs. Well, in 1992, I'd been in the monastery for just coming up to 2 years. It was about 20 months. And I'd made my simple profession, so I'd made vows for 3 years. And during that period in 1992, I think it was May 1992, we had our abbatial election. Now, in St. Benedict's Day, abbots were elected for terms of the whole life, or until they were removed from office due to incapacity. But generally, abbots died in office, a bit like popes. When my monastery was re-established in England in the 19th century, it wasn't big enough to have an abbot, so it was set up as a priory, and priors were only elected for every 4 years. So rather like presidents, there would be a prioral election every 4 years. In 1900, the community had petitioned Rome and had been given permission to be raised up to the level of an abbey, because the community had grown significantly larger, though there were a lot more monks based on site rather than out in the north of England serving parishes. And so they had the permission to become an abbey. But because it was the first time having an abbot elected, and an abbot as a religious superior has significantly greater powers than a prior. A prior, although he's technically in charge of the monastery, is more reporting to the abbot president of the congregation rather than being an autonomous abbey in its own right. So the monks were quite nervous and decided to petition to have their first election for just 8 years, And Rome agreed on the proviso that after 8 years, the community would then elect an abbot for life and maintain that tradition. Well, in fact, everybody seemed to have forgotten that bit. After 8 years, they elected the same man for another 8-year term, and after 8 years elected him for a third 8-year term, and he died at the end of the third 8-year term. And then they elected their next abbot for 8-year terms. And by the 1960s, Rome had kind of come round to the same idea that maybe there should be time limits on abbots in power, as it were, because it's such absolute power within the community. It's maybe better to have these checks and balances in modern life that probably wouldn't have been quite so strong in Benedict's day, but given the modern sensibilities and understanding of democratic structures and leadership, it was. So, in fact, what has happened since the Second Vatican Council is that other monasteries and congregations, although some still do elect life abbots, most of them now choose to elect for a fixed term, usually 8 years. So that was all the long-winded explanation of why there was an abbatial election. So the abbot who'd been elected in 84, you don't stand for election, you are nominated, but he was re-elected. However, just before the end of any abbot's first term in office, the community has a portrait painted in case that person is no longer abbot afterwards. And the portraits of abbots hang in the refectory where all the monks eat. The portraits of the priors are on the stairwells in the monastery and along the cloister, but the abbots were all kept together as a group in the refectory. In fact, in the old refectory, which was narrower but much longer, they used to have all the priors in there as well. But when they rebuilt the refectory, they made it squarer, so the wall space was less, and they had more windows on the west end of the wall. So it just meant that they just decided to have the abbots in the refectory and the priors in the cloister and the stairwells, which is fine. They're still there. So. And the community commissioned Andrew Festing to paint the abbot, then abbot, Patrick Barry. And he just finished painting Archbishop Cardinal Basil Hume, the Archbishop of Westminster. And I'll put a picture of if I can find one of his portraits in here for you. And just after painting the abbot, he was commissioned to paint a portrait of Her Majesty the Queen. And again, I'll put a picture of that in. I think she's in her garter robes on that one, and she looks very much the queenly figure. It's a very striking portrait, and he's a very photorealistic portrait painter. But, and this is where I come into it, the abbot, Mr. Festing could only paint from life. He found it very difficult. He would take photographs, but he actually preferred to paint from the life. So he paints from the life rather than from photographs. He prefers to use life. He will use stills. For example, with the Queen, he didn't necessarily have the option to have her sit for the length of time he needed. So the abbot had, while his portrait was being painted, he had to go to one of our sister houses in America to assist at an abbatial matter over there, at St. Louis, in fact, in Missouri. And so he couldn't sit for the whole of his portrait. So to get around this, Mr. Festing painted Abbot Patrick from the waist up, and then needed anybody dressed in a habit, to be painted from the waist down. And so I sat for the portrait of the abbot's legs. And so my legs were painted by Mr. Andrew Festing and hang on the refectory wall in Ampleforth. So that's how that happened. I think I know Wendy did, and I think a couple of other people mentioned, I think one of them mentioned in a private message to me actually, that they from what they were thinking that it was my naked legs. Why on earth would I want a portrait of my naked legs? I have no idea. Anyway, so I was 23 years old and I had a portrait painted of my legs. And finally, the #1 album. Technically, I've had 2 #1 albums, although I worked much more on the first of the 2 than the second. As a member of the community at Ampleforth, we were approached by Classic FM and asked to record Plainsong for people. And we didn't want it to just be one of those wallpaper, mood music kind of things. We wanted it to be a significant statement about our spiritual heritage of the liturgy of the hours and what it means to a monk to sing these pieces of music. And so the abbot, same abbot, came up with the idea that we would call it the Vision of Peace, and we would select pieces of music that kind of reflected a day or in the life of a monk, but also the whole life cycle of a monk, from when they join as a novice to when they die and are buried. And I was the assistant choir master at the time, and so I assisted the choir master with practices to get people up to speed on what we were doing. And I was also the assistant in the liturgy office at the time, so I prepared all the booklets for the monks to sing, but also booklets that we would send out to people who bought the CD. They could write into us and request a free booklet. So I worked through the Abbey Press and through the liturgy office on putting the booklets together with the explanations of what the pieces of music were and the translations and so on and so forth, so that people could participate with what they were listening to, because that was what we wanted. We wanted it to be a participatory experience rather than, as I say, just mood music. And there's nothing wrong with mood music, but there's plenty of other mood music that you can go to. And we didn't just want to be one of those. And then, of course, I sang on the disc as well. So I was involved creatively, I was involved in post-production, and I was actually one of the stars, one of the talent on the disc. So we did a follow-up a couple of years later, and both of these discs went to #1 on the Classic FM Classic Chart of the Week. So I have had 2 #1 selling albums. So, as I say, none of you got it right, but I hope you all enjoyed that bit of fun and that bit of history. So I'm going to call it a day here. I think I've not quite talked myself to a standstill, but there are lots of other things I want to talk about, but I will hold those over until next week and just keep this process going. I've kept you going now for over an hour, nearly an hour and a quarter. So, as I say, I'm sorry about last week. It will happen from time to time that, life just gets in the way. And I mean, other people I'm amazed by, Ella of the No Catchy Name Crochet podcast, and Jamie and Sarah and Katie of the Cozy Up with the Stitching Sisters. You have children to manage as well, and how you manage to get any recording done at all is beyond me. And it's quite funny. I really like it when the children either appear as voices off or just, stick their head around the camera to see. It's a bit like with my cats. They just, oh, well, I want to see what you're doing kind of thing. And I like those intrusions of real life. They make it all more real, I think. So anyway, I can see my cats looking at me, wondering why I'm still wittering away. Thank you all for joining me this week. I hope to have another episode for you next week. And so until then, stay safe, stay happy, stay well, and keep crafting. So bye for now.